All right, hello and happy Friday. Looks like you made it through the week. I know it was kind of goofy having to hop off of session one, finish up all of that, and then hop straight into session two and sort of begin our pre-reading activities for the graphic novel we will be reading. I chose not to jump into the actual reading of the book right away because I feel like that's a little bit too fast of a transition from session one. So that's why we are doing a little bit of introduction to the graphic novel, introduction to the novel itself, and kind of just getting ourselves ready to read so we're not having to just do a bunch of heavy reading right away. So I made this little intro video because I think it's really important to get enough background information on a book before you read it. I know it can be pretty intimidating, especially with a graphic novel, especially if you haven't read one before. Luckily, from what I've learned about students at Higher Ground, anime and manga are very popular genres of reading among you guys, so I'm sure that you have read something like this before. But like I mentioned earlier this week, comics and graphic novels are two very different things, so but at least you're familiar with the style of reading, so that's good. So what I want to do is just give you some background information about China, super basic like culture overview, and then a very, very brief overview of the book, just so that you know kind of what you're getting into. So the book that we are going to be reading for the entirety of this session, so we're just going to slowly take it piece by piece throughout the month. I feel like that's a good pace. I think that's what we would do if we were in school on regular terms, so that's how it'll be. This is the only piece of reading that you will need, and you will get the downloadable PDF version of it. So that'll be really nice for you. You'll be able to skim through on your device. So it's called American Born Chinese. It's by Jean Lun Yang, who is hasn't always been an author. He was actually working in technology for a very long time and sort of found himself wanting to enter the world of literature, as some of us just do. It's a great world to be in. So I'll tell you more about him in a little bit here. But yes, that is what we are reading, American Born Chinese. So when we think about Asia as a country, we often think about China because it's so big. It encompasses this very huge chunk of Asia. So I just wanted to make it very clear kind of where China is on the map here, right below Mongolia. Russia's all the way up here. And then below we have these smaller chunks like Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and India's way over here. So it's good to get that perspective to understand that China is not just all of Asia. China is a huge country in Asia, but it is among all of these other lovely places. Quick facts about China. China is very big. And I know that when we think about other countries, we often get this very stereotyped view of what that country looks like or what it's like to live in that country. And it's important to understand that China has both rural and urban parts. There's a lot of parts of China that are very like inner city type of situation, very reflective of places like Tokyo, or there's also parts that are like huge fields and farmland. So a lot like the United States when you think about it. Like when we break the United States up, we think like, oh, like Chicago, New York, those are states that have like a very urban population. And if we think about states like Montana or Texas, you think like, oh, fields, farms. So it's important to think about China like that too. China is not just one big demographic of people or one big look of a country. There are several different parts of China that encompass different populations of people, different cultures, things like that. Overall, it is a communist country. So if you think of the US, we're more of we're a democracy, kind of with capitalist values, I like to think. But in China, the government actually allots information and resources to everybody in the country to ensure that everyone is equal. So if you're a doctor versus a cashier, you're making the same money, you're getting the same resources, you probably live in a very similar style house. Very different than the United States. But you also have to think that China's different because maybe the people in China had more resources to start with. So a lot of the people there are already kind of doing the same things and going on the same paths. So it's so different from the US in a lot of ways. So you have to think of it that way. They just have an entirely different government style than us. And that's important to recognize going into the book, just understanding that they have that different background. Also important to recognize that China is a mostly Buddhist practicing country. So if we say that the U.S. is a very Christian practicing country, or I know that there is a huge population of Islam, we would say that China is mostly Buddhist, mostly, but not everybody. And we could also say that they are mostly Mandarin speaking. But just like in the US, if we say that we are an English speaking country, if you look at all the different states, you might have that Minnesotan accent versus that Texan accent, right? We like to say that every state has different accents. Well, in China, when we think about everyone being Mandarin speaking, there's different dialects of Mandarin. So again, the only reason I give this information to you is just so that you can understand that China is not just something far off and we'll never understand it. It's like so foreign to us. There's a lot of practices and things in China that are very similar to the style of the way that things are in the US. It's just different. So it's important to recognize the differences and the similarities alike. Just get that quick little bit of information in there. So let's hop into the novel quickly here. So it's written by Jean Lu Yang, like I mentioned before. He once worked in technology, and then he later found that his calling was actually to be a teacher. He wanted to work with people and students and do that teaching piece. And then he later figured out that he was really interested in drawing cartoons and writing. And so that's what he did. He wrote this book among many other books that he has written and illustrated. And the novel, interestingly enough, is actually based on Jean's own experiences as an Asian American person. So an Asian child, teenager in the United States. And it's very interesting to see how he sort of projects that through the characters, or mostly one character in the book. So in a nutshell, it's important that you know that the book has 3 different storylines. So if you were annoyed by those books where every chapter it sort of like flips who's narrating the story or who it's like being focused on, this is one of those. But it's really interesting and a lot easier to read just because you're looking at pictures. So like you're not having to be like, wait a minute, is this character or this character? No, like you can see what character it is. So it's you don't have to do that whole battling of like, okay, who's speaking? Like you'll know. But it is important to recognize that it's broken up into 3 storylines because they develop separately, but they come together in the end. And it's really fun to try to predict how the 3 storylines are going to come together, because when I read this the first time, I could never have seen it coming. I was like, what? Like mind blown. So really fun book to read in that sense. So here's our 3 characters that kind of make up the 3 storylines. So we have the Monkey King. If you know anything about Asian culture, he is actually a beloved fictional character in the East. And is from a novel called Journey to the West, but there have been movies made about him. There are animes made about him. Very, very popular among that culture, and a little bit here too, I think. Goku from Dragon Ball Z is actually based off of this character, so we loved it so much that we went and did our own thing. So it's very, very common among all people. You kind of just have to know it. If you look it up, you'll see it, and you'll understand, like, oh, this character in this book is not just something that Jean made up. Like, it's already a thing, but he kind of adds a little twist to it. In this particular novel, he is immortal, so he cannot be killed. He is also invulnerable, so he cannot be injured. I think I'm saying that right. It's really not that big of a deal in the storyline, but that's what he is. He's very witty, as monkeys often are portrayed in books, very witty, kind of like a trickster sort of character. And in the book, he is on a journey to become his truest self. And he's doing so by living among humans for 40 years. And that's all I'll give you, because if I give you too much, you're not going to get to do the fun part on your own. Jin Wang, he is the most realistic and relatable character in the book. He really portrays like that humanistic view, and where we can say like, oh, I get that. I understand what he's going through. He was born in San Francisco to immigrant parents, so obviously he was born in America, but his background is entirely Chinese. He's very insecure in the book about his culture and his background, and you'll notice that right away. He's having a major identity crisis throughout the book, and he's trying to just navigate his way through high school, but he's having a hard time trying to be this American thing that everyone else is, while also balancing his Chinese background. So that's a very, very interesting perspective. And last but not least, we have Chin Ki. He is entirely a stock character. He is based on a culmination of Chinese stereotypes. So basically, think every Chinese stereotype, like everything that Chinese people might be made fun of for, he's that. He is a representation of all of the ways that we view people from China. His name, in and of itself, Chin Ki, is actually a racial slur. So if you call someone a CHINK, that is basically a racial slur against Asian people. And if you call someone CHINKY, that is referring to basically any person with like squinty eyes. So it's entirely a slur. A really awful thing to say to people, but in the book it makes sense why that's his name, because his whole role in the book is to show the stereotypes that are brought against Asian people. In the book, he is cousins with Danny, who is white, which is a really, I hate to say it, but it's like a fun dynamic because he's just constantly trying to embarrass Danny. And he's like, oh my gosh, this guy, he's like so ashamed of him. But that has a further meaning if you dig deeper into it. And again, it's meant to bring light to the often misconstrued view of Asian people and Asia in general. So I don't want to give you too much more than that, but I did think it was important to introduce to you basically like what this book is all about and why we're reading it. We're going to talk a lot about identity this semester. We're going to talk a lot about character, just because there are 3 storylines with 3 very purposeful and meaningful characters. We're going to do a lot of analysis with that. Talk a lot about the graphic novel and the meaning that brings to the reading experience versus a print novel. I chose this for a reason. I knew that it would be really successful with my summer school students, just because I know it's hard to get into a regular book when you're trying to enjoy your summer. So hopefully something that's a little more fun, more picturesque will be successful for you. So the essential questions that I want you guys to think about as you read, and we will address these over and over again, are what are the similarities and differences of a graphic novel reading versus a print reading? So you can base that off of your own recreational reading that you do or reading that you've done in other classrooms. Discussion of the stereotypes surrounding Chin Ki, though he is not entirely important to the plot of the story, what he represents is incredibly important, and I want to make sure that we fully discuss that. Danny is a character who's not even a main character really in the book. He doesn't have his own storyline, but he is meant to represent this all-American boy versus the different Asian characters. So it's very important that we discuss what that means to be all-American and what you think of Danny as a character. And the theme of identity. How do we see it in each storyline? Because it truly comes to fruition in each storyline. All right, so since today is Friday, we're finishing up the week. All I'm having you do today is just some very simple pre-reading activities to get you thinking about the book and what it's all about. And then next week, I will put the PDF version of the book in its entirety in the folder so you can start your reading, and we'll get going. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you Monday.